When I walked into my son's kitchen carrying groceries I'd just spent $347 on, my daughter-in-law Jessica looked up from her phone and said, "God, Margaret, you're such a burden. Can't you see we're busy?" The words hit me like a slap across the face with a frozen fish. I stood there, bags cutting into my palms, feeling my 68-year-old heart crack right down the middle. This was the same woman I'd paid $85,000 to put through her master's program. The same woman whose $2,400 monthly mortgage I'd been covering for the past 14 months, while she found herself between jobs. My son David didn't even look up from his laptop. That silence hurt worse than her words. Let me back up. I need you to understand how we got here. 3 years ago, David married Jessica in a ceremony I funded entirely. The venue alone was $23,000, her dress, another for $1,500. I wrote those checks with a smile because I loved my son and I wanted him happy. My husband Thomas had passed away 2 years before, leaving me comfortable but not wealthy. Still, I had enough. I thought family was everything. The manipulation started small. A phone call here and there. "Mom, our water heater died. Could you help us out?" That was $1,800. Then it was the car repair, $3,200. Then Jessica's student loans, which somehow became my responsibility. "We're family now," she'd say, touching my arm with those perfectly manicured nails I'd paid $75 every 2 weeks to maintain. I kept a spreadsheet. I'm not stupid, despite what they thought. Over 3 years, I'd given them $186,450, not loaned, given, because every time I mentioned repayment, Jessica would tear up and say, "I thought you wanted us to succeed. Don't you love David?" What kind of monster doesn't want her son to succeed? But that day in the kitchen, something in me shifted. Maybe it was the casual cruelty in her tone, like swatting away a fly. Maybe it was how David finally looked up, and instead of defending me, he said, "Mom, you did kind of just show up unannounced. I'd been calling for 20 minutes. They hadn't answered. I bought food for your dinner," I said quietly. "You mentioned you were both too busy to shop." Jessica sighed like I'd asked her to climb Everest. "We're actually doing keto now. This is all carbs. You never listen. They told me about keto yesterday, and somehow I was supposed to have rewired 40 years of knowing my son's favorite meals in 24 hours. I set the bags down on their granite countertop, the one I'd contributed $12,000 toward when they remodeled. "You're welcome," I said. Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" I said, "You're welcome. For the groceries, for the mortgage payments, for your education, for your wedding, for everything." My voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. In that moment, I watched Jessica's face transform from annoyance to something calculating. "David, your mother is being really weird right now," she said, her voice suddenly small and frightened. "And my son, my baby boy who I'd raised to be kind and strong, looked at me like I was a stranger having a breakdown in his kitchen." That night, I lay in bed in my empty house and did math, real math. I'd given them the equivalent of a house down payment, a new car, all for years of retirement cruises Thomas and I had planned but never took because he died too soon. I cried for exactly 10 minutes. Then I got angry. Then I got strategic. The next morning, I called my late husband's lawyer, Martin Fletcher. He'd been Thomas's friend for 30 years, and he'd handled our estate planning. "Martin," I said, "I need to understand something about gift taxes and financial elder abuse." There was a pause. "Margaret, are you okay?" "Not even a little bit. But I'm going to be." I met him at his office that afternoon. I brought my spreadsheet, my bank statements, and 3 years of text messages that told a story I'd been too close to see clearly. Martin's jaw tightened as he reviewed the documents. Margaret, I'm obligated to tell you that much of this money, legally speaking, was given as gifts. But this pattern, he tapped the pages. This shows something else. The amounts escalated. The requests became demands. And look here, these texts where she implies you're mentally declining when you started asking about repayment, I stared at the texts I'd highlighted. Jessica had sent them to David, but he'd accidentally included me in the thread once. Mom's getting forgetful. She keeps saying weird things about money we borrowed. Should we be worried about her living alone? I wasn't forgetful. I was being gaslight. What are my options? I asked. Martin leaned back. Legally limited. But you can stop the bleeding immediately. Cut off access to any accounts. Document everything going forward. And Margaret, if they escalate, which I suspect they will, we'll have a clear record of their behavior. I walked out of his office feeling something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Powerful. Step 1. I called my bank and removed David and Jessica from every account where I'd added them for emergencies. The banker, a kind woman named Patricia, looked concerned. Mrs. Chen, are you sure? Your son has been on these accounts for 18 months. I'm completely sure. And Patricia, if either of them try to access these accounts or claim I'm incompetent, I need you to note in my file that I'm of sound mind, and this is my explicit choice. She nodded slowly. I'll make a detailed note. Would you like to set up a password verification system? Smart woman. Yes, the password is Thomas would be proud. Step 2. I changed every lock on my house. The locksmith, a guy named Ray who looked like he'd seen everything, didn't even blink. Let me guess, he said. Family thinks they're entitled to your space. You've done this before. Lady, you're my 3rd call this week. Good for you for setting boundaries. That validation from a stranger meant more than it should have. Step 3. I blocked their numbers. Not permanently. Just long enough to think clearly. The escalation started within hours. David showed up at my door at 7 p.m. I watched through my new Ring doorbell camera as he tried his key. Confusion crossed his face when it didn't work. He knocked, then pounded. Mom. Mom, are you okay? Your key doesn't work, Mom. I took a breath and opened the door, keeping the chain latched. I'm fine, David. What's going on? Why doesn't my key work? We've been calling you all day. I changed the locks. And I've decided to take some time to myself. Mom, are you? He lowered his voice, glancing at the camera. Are you feeling okay? Jessica's worried you might be having some kind of episode. There it was. The script she'd written for him. I'm completely lucid. David, I'm simply done being treated like an ATM with no feelings. I'm done being called a burden in my own son's kitchen. His face went pale. She didn't mean it like that. You startled her. And Mom, about the money, we were going to pay you back once Jessica's new job starts. What new job? Silence, long, damning silence. David, Jessica hasn't worked in over a year. She's been networking and waiting for the right opportunity while I paid your bills. When I asked you about it last month, you told me she had 3 interviews lined up. Were those real? Mom, you're twisting things. Answer the question. I don't know. She handles her job search. But Mom, we're family. Family helps each other. Family doesn't call each other burdens. Family doesn't gaslight each other about dementia. And family doesn't take nearly $200,000 without so much as a thank you. I watched him do the math in his head, and the moment he realized I'd been keeping track, fear flickered across his face. I need space. David, please respect that I closed the door. He stood there for 5 more minutes, knocking periodically, before finally leaving. Through the camera, I watched him call someone, probably Jessica, his gestures agitated. That night, Jessica called from a number I hadn't blocked. I let it go to voicemail. Margaret, it's Jessica. Listen, I know you're upset, but this is really hurtful. David is devastated that you'd cut him off like this. We thought you loved us. We thought you wanted to support our family. If you're having memory issues or mental problems, we can get you help. We've been talking to a doctor friend about symptoms. Please call us back. We love you. The message was perfect. Loving, concerned, with just enough implication that I was the problem. I saved it. The next morning, my neighbor Helen knocked on my door with coffee and cinnamon rolls. Saw your son at your door last night on my evening walk. Everything okay? Helen was 72, sharp as a tack, and had buried to husbands. She didn't miss much. I surprised myself by telling her everything. The whole ugly truth. She listened without interrupting, then said, Margaret Chen, let me tell you something. My second husband's daughter pulled the same act. Took $90,000 from him over 5 years, then tried to have him declared incompetent when he cut her off. Know what I learned. Document everything. Every conversation, every text, every encounter. They're going to escalate because you've cut off their cash flow. Be ready. How did it end for you? He died before it got to court, but I made damn sure she didn't get a penny from his estate. Worth every lawyer's fee, she squeezed my hand. You're doing the right thing. Your husband would be proud. There was that phrase again. Over the next week, David and Jessica tried everything. Love-bombing texts from David about childhood memories. Cruel texts from Jessica about how I'd destroyed their marriage with my paranoia. Emails about family therapy. A letter from their pastor about forgiveness and reconciliation. I saved it all. Then Jessica got creative. She posted on Facebook, "Heartbroken today." When mental illness affects someone you love, all you can do is pray for them and hope they get the help they need. Sending love to all the families dealing with similar struggles. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. 15 people commented with sympathy. 3 asked directly who she was talking about. She responded, I can't say. But please keep David's mother in your prayers. I screenshot everything. The lawyer letter arrived 2 weeks after I changed my locks. Jessica and David were suing me for elder financial exploitation. The claim was that I'd been incompetent for months, that they'd been managing my finances at my request, and that I'd now turned against them due to paranoid delusions. They wanted conservatorship. I read the filing in Martin's office, my hands shaking with rage. They claim you asked them to help manage your money because you were afraid of making mistakes. They have texts where you asked for their advice on bills and expenses. They paint themselves as concerned caregivers who were horrified when you suddenly accused them of theft. That's not. I asked their advice on their bills. The ones I was paying. They're twisting it, I know. But Margaret, this is going to get ugly. They've found a doctor willing to evaluate you based on concerning behaviors they've reported. The court will likely require a full competency evaluation. Fine, I'll take any test they want. I'm not crazy, Martin. I'm done being used. The evaluation was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, Jessica's campaign continued. She shared photos on social media of her and David at my house from years ago, captioned with things like missing the good times before Alzheimer's took our Margaret. I didn't have Alzheimer's. I'd never been diagnosed with anything. More people started calling me. Concerned friends from my book club and church. Margaret, we heard you're struggling. Do you need anything? I held a small gathering at my home and invited 10 of my closest friends. I made tea, served cookies, and told them the truth. I showed them my bank statements, the spreadsheet, the texts. I asked them to simply bear witness that I was lucid, coherent, and rational. My friend Susan, a retired nurse, started crying. Margaret, why didn't you tell us sooner? Because I was ashamed. I felt stupid for letting it happen. You're not stupid. You're loving. There's a difference. She hugged me. What do you need? I need witnesses. I need people who can testify that I'm of sound mind. Because they're trying to take everything from me. Including my autonomy, all 10 agreed to testify if needed. The competency evaluation was conducted by Dr. Patricia Summers, a neuropsychologist with 30 years of experience. She spent 4 hours with me, testing my memory, reasoning, financial understanding, and emotional state. At the end, she set down her pen. Mrs. Chen, I'm going to be frank with you. You show absolutely no signs of cognitive impairment. Your memory is sharp, your reasoning is sound, and your emotional responses are appropriate to your situation. Someone has gaslighted you terribly, and I'm sorry, I cried. Not from sadness, but from relief that a professional validated what I knew. My report will reflect that. I'm also going to note that the accusations against you appear to be financially motivated, which is a red flag for elder abuse. Your children may not like my findings. They didn't. 3 days before the hearing, Jessica showed up at my house with a camera crew. Literally, she'd brought a local news reporter. She'd apparently convinced that I was a confused elderly woman being isolated from her loving family. I watched from my window as she knocked, crying dramatically for the camera. Please, Margaret, we just want to make sure you're safe. We love you. I called the police. 2 officers arrived within minutes. I opened the door, invited them inside, and calmly explained the situation. I showed them the restraining order Martin had helped me file that morning, which Jessica hadn't yet been served with but was about to be. Ma'am, one officer said to Jessica, you need to leave this property immediately. And you, he said to the reporter, you might want to get the full story before you run with this. I stood in my doorway, watching Jessica's mask slip for just a moment. Pure rage flickered across her face before she composed herself back into the concerned daughter. Law. The reporter, to her credit, asked to interview me. I declined. Wait for the court hearing, I said. The truth will come out then. The hearing was set in family court, and the room was smaller than I'd imagined. Judge Maria Costello presided, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Jessica and David sat with their lawyer, a slick-looking man named Brett Hammond, who specialized in elder care cases. Apparently, he usually represented the elderly person. This was different. Our side presented first. Martin called Dr. Summers, who testified about my evaluation. She was unshakable under cross-examination. Mrs. Chen shows no signs of dementia, delusional thinking, or impaired judgment. Her recall of financial transactions is detailed and accurate. Her emotional responses are appropriate. In my professional opinion, she is fully competent to manage her own affairs. Hammond tried. But doctor, isn't it possible that she's experiencing lucid intervals? That these accusations against her family stem from paranoia? No, paranoia presents differently. Mrs. Chen's concerns are based on documented facts, not irrational fears. There's a significant difference between paranoia and justified anger at being exploited. Next, Martin called my friends. Susan testified about knowing me for 20 years, about my sharp mind and generous heart. Helen testified about the night David showed up, about our conversation, about my clarity and pain. She wasn't confused, Helen said firmly. She was heartbroken. There's a difference. My pastor, Father Michael, testified that I'd been a pillar of the community for decades, managing church fundraisers and serving on financial committees. Margaret Chen is one of the most financially astute people I know. The idea that she's incompetent is laughable. Then came the bank records. Martin projected my spreadsheet onto a screen, walking the judge through every transaction. The escalating amounts. The timing of requests. The text messages asking for money followed immediately by transfers. Your Honor, you can see the pattern clearly. Small requests building to large demands. And note here, when Mrs. Chen began questioning these transactions, the accusations of mental incompetence began immediately. This is classic financial exploitation. Patricia from the bank testified about my visit, about my clear instructions, about the password system we'd set up. Mrs. Chen was completely lucid and in control. She knew exactly what she was doing and why. Then it was their turn. Hammond called David first. My son took the stand looking nervous, not meeting my eyes. Mr. Chen, tell us about your mother's behavior over the past year. She's been different, forgetful, repetitive. She'd ask us the same questions multiple times. We got worried. What kind of questions? About money, mostly. She'd forget she'd given us things and then accuse us of taking them. Martin's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Chen, you claim your mother was forgetful about money. Do you have any documentation of these repeated questions? It was in person, mostly. Phone calls, I see. And yet, all of her text messages show clear, coherent communication with specific dollar amounts and dates. Can you explain that? David stammered. She was better over text. Or she wasn't forgetful at all, and you're lying. Let me ask you directly, how much money has your mother given you over the past 3 years? I don't know exactly. You don't know. Take a guess, maybe 50,000? Martin displayed the spreadsheet. 186,000 for $150. You were off by 136,000 for $150. Who's forgetful, Mr. Chen? David's face turned red. And Mr. Chen, you testified your mother asked you to manage her finances. Can you produce any written documentation of this request? Any power of attorney? Any legal agreement? No, it was verbal. How convenient. So you have no proof of permission, but you had access to her accounts for 18 months. Did you ever thank her for the money she gave you? Silence. Let me repeat the question. Did you ever say thank you? Yes, of course, really. Can you show the court a single text message where you thanked her? More silence. Jessica was next. She was better prepared, more polished. She cried on cue. I love Margaret like my own mother. When I saw her declining, it broke my heart. We tried so hard to help her, to support her. And then suddenly, she turned on us. She changed her locks, cut us off completely. We just wanted to make sure she was safe. Ms. Chen, you posted on social media about Alzheimer's. Had Mrs. Chen been diagnosed with Alzheimer's? No, but the symptoms were there. The forgetfulness, the accusations. We were trying to get her help. Martin's turn. Ms. Chen, did you call Mrs. Chen a burden? No, absolutely not. I would never. Let me refresh your memory. Martin played a recording I didn't even know I had. Apparently, I'd accidentally pocket-dialed Helen that day in the kitchen, and she'd saved it. Jessica's voice came through crystal clear. God, Margaret, you're such a burden. Can't you see we're busy? The courtroom went silent. Jessica's face drained of color. That was taken out of context. I was having a bad day that led you to call the woman who'd paid $85,000 for your education a burden. Let's talk about that education. Have you paid back any of that money? It was a gift. Did Mrs. Chen tell you it was a gift, or did you assume it was? Family helps family. That's not an answer. Did she explicitly say, this is a gift, you don't need to repay me? Jessica's jaw tightened. Not in those words. So you took nearly $200,000 from an elderly widow and never once discussed repayment terms. And when she finally asked about it, you suggested she had dementia. Is that accurate? You're twisting everything. Am I? Let's look at your social media posts. Martin displayed them one by one. Here you are implying Mrs. Chen has Alzheimer's. Here you are asking for prayers for David's mother. You never named her, but everyone knew who you meant. This looks less like concern and more like a smear campaign to discredit her before she could expose what you'd done. Jessica started crying harder. We were worried. You were worried about your free money disappearing, Martin said coldly. No further questions. The judge called a 15-minute recess. When we returned, her face was set. "I've seen enough. Mrs. Chen, would you like to speak?" My legs shook as I stood. "Yes, Your Honour." I walked to the stand, and for the first time in the hearing, I looked directly at David. "I loved you with everything I had. When your father died, you were my reason to keep going. I would have given you anything you asked for, and I did. But love isn't supposed to hurt like this. Love isn't supposed to make you feel small and crazy and worthless. I gave you money because I wanted you to thrive. You took it because you felt entitled to it. Those are very different things." My voice cracked but didn't break. "I am not incompetent. I am not demented. I'm just done being treated like a checkbook with no feelings. I want my life back. I want my autonomy back. And I want my son back, but I don't think I'll get that. Because the son I raised wouldn't have let any of this happen." David was crying now. Jessica stared at the table. Judge Castellano nodded slowly. "Mrs. Chen, thank you. You may step down." The judge's ruling came swiftly. "I find no evidence whatsoever of mental incompetence. Mrs. Margaret Chen is fully capable of managing her own affairs. The petition for conservatorship is denied. Furthermore, I am deeply troubled by what appears to be a coordinated effort to discredit Mrs. Chen when she attempted to set financial boundaries. While this court cannot rule on the issue of financial elder abuse without formal charges being filed, I am recommending this case be reviewed by Adult Protective Services." She looked at David and Jessica. "You should both be ashamed of yourselves." The gavel came down. I walked out of that courtroom with Martin by my side, feeling lighter than I had in 3 years. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you live your life. They can't touch you, Margaret. You're free." David tried to approach me in the parking lot. I held up my hand. "Not today. Maybe not ever. You made your choice. Mom, please, you stood by while your wife called me a burden. You let her convince you I was crazy. You tried to take away my freedom. Whatever relationship we had, you destroyed it. Not me, you." I got in my car and drove home. Over the next few months, things shifted. Jessica filed for divorce from David 3 weeks after the hearing. Apparently, without my money, the marriage had nothing left to hold it together. She moved back to her parents' house in another state. David sent me letters. Long, rambling apologies full of excuses and justifications. I read the first 2, then stopped. He needed to do his own work, and I needed to heal. I took the money I would have spent on them and booked a Mediterranean cruise Thomas and I had dreamed about. I scattered some of his ashes in the Greek islands and cried happy tears. I joined new groups, made new friends who didn't see me as a resource to exploit. I discovered I actually liked being alone with my thoughts, my books, my garden. Helen, and I started a support group for elderly people dealing with financial exploitation from family members. We called it Silver Boundaries. 15 people came to the first meeting. 30 to the second. We were needed. One afternoon, 6 months after the hearing, David showed up at my door. Not pounding, not demanding. Just knocking quietly. I answered. He looked terrible. Thinner, older, defeated. "Mom, I know I don't deserve your time. But I've been in therapy. Real therapy, 3 times a week. And I need to tell you that you were right about everything. Jessica gaslighted me too, just in different ways. I was weak, and I let her turn me against you because it was easier than standing up to her. I destroyed the most important relationship in my life because I was a coward." He wasn't crying for sympathy. He was just stating facts. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. But I needed you to know that I see it now, all of it. And I'm sorry doesn't even begin to cover what I feel. I studied my son. Somewhere under the guilt and shame, I could see the boy I'd raised. But I could also see that he was a man who'd made his choices. Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. "I'm glad you're in therapy. I hope you find peace. Do you think, eventually, we could maybe try again?" I don't know, David. Ask me in a year. If you're still doing the work, still becoming someone I can trust, maybe. But not now. The wound is too fresh, he nodded. That's more than I deserve. Thank you, Mom. He left without asking for anything else. That was progress. I don't know if David and I will rebuild our relationship. Some days I hope we will. Other days I think the damage is permanent. But I've learned something crucial. I don't need to sacrifice my peace and dignity to maintain relationships with people who don't value them. My name is Margaret Chen. I am 68 years old. And I have finally learned that love without respect is just exploitation wearing a mask. I've learned that being called family doesn't obligate me to bankrupt my future for people who view me as an ATM. I've learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. The question I want to leave you with is this: if someone in your life makes you feel small, crazy, or worthless when you set a boundary, are they really family? Or are they just someone who benefits from your silence? Think about it. Because I waited 3 years and nearly $200,000 to ask myself that question. Don't wait as long as I did. Trust yourself. You're not crazy. You're not being difficult. You're being human. And that's more than enough.